The Carolina Hurricanes, as is tradition, traded out of the first round and, again, as is tradition, in my opinion, ended up with another heck of a draft class. So the Carolina Hurricanes made a swap to gain 2 second-round picks in the draft from their first-round pick in the late first round, and they took at 34th overall Dominic Badinka of the Malmö Redhawks of the Swedish Hockey League. And Badinka's a player that grew on me very, very quickly this season, especially once he made the jump to the professional level there. I've been watching him since playing with Jokerit in Finland last year, and I've really been intrigued by the tools that he brings. He's very tall, but a very gifted skater, especially when it comes to generating straight line speed. He has a willingness to play physically, and I think there's a great frame to build around with him. He's got a pretty good shot from the point as well, and once in a while you see some motion and movement at the offensive blue line that drives decent offensive results that I'd like to nurture. So for the Carolina Hurricanes at 34, I think they made a really good pick here, and I know that Carolina's really excited about this player and really thinks they got a really high-end player. At 50th overall, Carolina took Nikita Artamonov, hockey Twitter darling of the year, and NHL model extraordinaire. Now, with Nikita Artamonov, I've always been a little bit tepid with regards to his production being some sort of otherworldly achievement, but that does not mean I'm not a fan of this player, because I really am. I think Nikita Artamonov pretty easily projects as a third-line energy guy. He just seems to have a great grasp for intense styles of hockey. He plays hard at both ends of the ice. He's pretty quick with his decisions and getting pucks off of the boards and basically participating in a lot of transition play going both directions and just trying to be a factor everywhere. He has a decent skill level and an okay shot that I would like to really develop from here and try to get him more involved in the offensive zone, because he wasn't really taking over shifts in the offensive zone as much as he was off the puck, allowing himself to play with a lot of energy and more of a back checker first. But I think the package all around with Artamonov is really well-rounded and a really nice foundation to build upon, and in a sense they got him for doing nothing, so I'm pretty sure they're happy with this pick as well, and I am too. Nikita Artamonov was another player in my first round, so getting him at 50 I think is a pretty decent pick, even though I think a guy like Teddy Stiga would have been maybe more up my alley. Artamonov's a pretty solid choice and just adds to a massive stable of good Russians Carolina's drafted over the years. At 69th overall, they drafted Noel Franson, a player I had ranked at 43rd overall, much higher than where they drafted him, and I've really liked Noel Franson all year long. I have gone a little bit back and forth on just how likely I see an NHL future for him, but I do think that there is a really high upside pick here. When the guy has the puck on his stick, he can be a real magician with it. He doesn't dangle everyone, he doesn't really just get around everyone with anything outside of just determination and speed, but he brings a lot of that, and he brings a lot of confidence, and a pretty good shot that he deploys from all over the ice as well. So this is a pretty interesting offensive defenseman that skates really well around the ice. I think the refinements in his game really do need to come on the defensive side of things, especially on transitions. He can be caught a little bit flat-footed, his lateral mobility is a little bit shaky at times, and guys can get around him a little too easily, but again, that's not uncommon in players this age, and I think he's a player where his puck carrying ability and offensive instincts will outshine the issues that might be there in a few years. Fast forwarding a bit to 124th overall, Carolina went back to Russia and, surprisingly for me, drafted Alexander Katski. And I've said to people a few times this year that Katski is kind of like the Russian Henry Muse. Really smart passer and sees the ice really well most of the time and has really good ideas when he's playing with the puck on his stick. And in the offensive zone, you see some deception and some ability to step up from the blue line and a willingness to create inside scoring areas that is pretty uncommon for defensemen at his age. The problem for me is that while I think his skating technique is pretty good and he gets around the ice okay, he doesn't really generate a lot of power or evasion. He takes on a lot of chances on himself to almost a detriment, but I do think that the raw thinking approach that he brings to the game is really impressive, especially for a Russian junior league player, and I feel like if you leave him in Russia for 4, 5, 6 seasons, which I expect is what's going to happen, I think you could end up with an interesting player here that may become an NHL player, but I really like what he's got already, and maybe there's going to be something more in the future. At 133rd, Carolina drafted Oscar Vuolet, a player who has just been dominating the Swedish junior hockey circuit for 2 seasons now. now. With Vette, he's a really tough one for me. There are moments where I really do like what he brings. I think he brings a really high energy game, especially in the offensive zone. At the SHL level this year, he didn't really have a lot of production, but I do think that he did bring enough intensity and physical play to at least be a factor there, and enough pace in his game where he didn't look a step behind or anything there. But I do think he does need to work on some skill and some really but I do think he needs to work on his skill level and being a bit more creative with the puck on his stick outside the offensive zone. He's very much a shoot first, ask questions later type of player, which is fine, and he does have a heck of a shot, but I do think that there's a lot of refinements that Vette doesn't quite have as of right now. But to see him drafted at 133rd overall might be a bit early for me, but I do like what he brings to the table, and there are some really high-end tools, and it seems like Carolina identifies players that have at least a specific area of the game in which the player is high-end and bets on that. And in Vlette's case, his shot is worth betting on, and the pace of his game is pretty good. At 156th, they drafted one of the most successful junior goal scorers in Quebec's history in Justin Poirier. Fun fact, he was on my flight down to Vegas, which was pretty cool. I've been a bit of a Poirier doubter this year because I've just watched him a whole bunch of times this year, and when you look at his shot map and when you really look at him in detail, you really worry about how much he's going to succeed with scoring goals in the National Hockey League, let alone the American Hockey League at some point. I do think he could be a successful minor league scorer. He's got a pretty good shot, he's decently quick on his feet, but I do think that the skill level is not really near where it's going to need to be an offensive player at higher levels. I do worry about his defensive involvement, especially considering his size. He's not the most intense player out there, but he does put a lot of pucks on the net, and he did score a lot of goals from all over the offensive zone. But to me, that profile has always been a bit of a troubling one to project, especially for a player this small who doesn't really bring a whole lot of diversity in his game. We'll see what happens, and I think Carolina is doing another thing here where they're betting on a relatively low probability that he becomes a pretty good NHL player at some point. And at this point in the draft, I guess it makes sense. I can't really fault them for going with Poirier in this area of the draft, and this is around where I would have started thinking about taking a swing on him. But I just think you're taking a really, really big swing. At 168th, they drafted Teodor Cole, the first of a few Russians at the end of the draft that I just was sitting there wondering how the heck no one's taken a chance on these guys. Teodor Cole is one of the youngest defensemen in this year's draft, and I have had really mixed viewings of him, but seeing him at the junior level, and he played for the Russian national team in the limited time that they played this year, I thought he looked really good in those performances. He played at all three levels of the Russian professional system this year and the junior system, and looked pretty decent in all of them. He's got a booming wrist shot from the point. There's a decent amount of skill from him as well. The mobility is a big problem for me. He's very tall and very lanky, and I find that he can get left behind and flat-footed a little bit too often. But the way he sees the ice and sees his line mates and keeps his passing work simple but effective is really interesting to me, and considering some of the players that went off the board before him, I would be very curious to have taken a bet on Teodor Cole here. And again, with Russian players, you have the luxury of leaving them in Russia until they're good, and you always will have their rights, and I think Cole might be another one of those players. I wouldn't expect him to see him in the NHL anytime soon, but the raw tools and the possibilities here are really, really interesting with Cole, so we'll see what happens with him, but I thought this was a really interesting pick for them late. At 184th, the Carolina Hurricanes drafted Roman Shukan. Now, I actually spoke to some people who are very familiar with this player, and some people love this guy. Now, I can kind of see why. He wasn't ranked on my list, but I did have him ranked at a certain point this year. But I just feel like he has a really, really long way to go before he makes it to the NHL. But the tools are really impressive. He's very lanky, but he's got a lot of skill and a really, really great sense of footwork. He gets around the ice pretty well. He's very, very fluid on his feet and combines that with high-level skill to be a pretty intriguing player. The way he sees the ice and the way he moves the puck is a bit of a question mark, and the offensive game isn't really there for Shukan, but they are drafting a player who has some very interesting tools and betting on him in the future. He's in a pretty good system with Yaroslavl. We'll see what happens with him from here, but I do really think that this is going to be an interesting situation for him over the next little while. We'll see how it works out, but again, this is another player with interesting tools that Carolina Carolina is betting on. Then we've got Fyodor Avramov, and Avramov I had ranked at 61st and he went 188th. I don't really know how to explain this one, but I guess he was playing on a team that not a whole lot of people pay attention to, and they were the worst team in their division, and their division was the top division in Russian junior hockey, so I guess it could be forgiven that he might be a little bit of an afterthought. I feel like out of all of the Russians that I've seen in the last few years, he might be one of the most intriguing NHL prospects to come out of the Russian Junior League. He's got the size to make it work. He's got a wicked wrist shot that he uses from medium danger areas largely. He's got a really physical side to his game that I would love to see him bring out more often. He's a great example of a player who, when he applies himself, you see a lot of really, really good traits there. I really liked Fyodor Avramov this year. At one point, he was as high as my 30s, and the more I saw him, the more I saw a little bit of inconsistency and a little bit of careless play, especially in his own end and getting the puck out of his own end. But still, I think there's a lot of potential with Avramov, and who knows? He might be playing for his parent team in Sochi next season, and that would be really, really nice. But Fyodor Avramov is another one of these players that I expect will be left in Russia and just gets better and better and better every year. He has all the tools to make it work, and it's just going to be a matter of how he's coached and developed and managed from here. But I was a really big fan of this pick, to say the least, considering he was the 4th player in my top 2 rounds that Carolina drafted without a first-round draft pick. Closing their draft at 220th, they drafted Andrei Krutov, who is a player that I have seen here and there while watching Nikita Artamonov and watching Anton Salayev, and Krutov has been a bit of a standout for me. I wasn't really sure about drafting him at some point, but if you're the Carolina Hurricanes and you see the skill level and the pace of the game that Krutov brings with a pretty good wrist shot release, you go, we may as well bet on that, because who knows where he'll be in 5 years, and I can't blame them. I think Krutov was one of the more fun Russian junior players that I didn't have ranked this season. At one point I did have him on the watch list, but after watching a few games of him, I just thought he fell a little bit short of that, and considering he was one of the last picks in the draft, I guess that makes a little bit of sense. But again, this is another player that Carolina is drafting where they can sort of go, well, at least we have these talents that we can bet on now, and who knows where he'll be in 5 years, and yeah, who knows where he'll be, but he is an interesting player. So the Carolina Hurricanes once again had a great draft, and I'm giving them a 1C. They traded down out of the first round, but given the fact that they had all of these picks and none of them were in the first round, I think they did a great job. I mean, they drafted 4 guys that were in my top 2 rounds and 3 guys off my watch list. That's 7 players out of the around 110 that I ranked, which I'm a big fan of, and I think all of those players have a chance of being something. And I think Roman Shokrin and Andrei Krutov very easily could have been on that list as well. I've liked those players, I just didn't see enough out of them that I really wanted to put them there. But they're really all just good players that they drafted. Say what you will about guys like Vette and Poirier and maybe Siriatsky, but there's something there with those players that they're banking on. Here and there, I might have picked a few different players or gone a different direction in a few spots here and there, but all in all, to me, it's a top-tier class of players given what they had, and there's a lot of possibilities locked within this draft class. So that's it for the Carolina Hurricanes. If you liked it, you can click in the description box to find our Fanatics affiliate link, where you'll buy anything in the store and it'll give us a small kickback. Or you could go to Scouching.ca, where a subscription gets you access to a private Discord server, as well as plenty of goodies like data tables for drafted and undrafted prospects, and plenty of other fun toys you can check out there. So that's it for the Carolina Hurricanes, and we're going to move on to the Utah Hockey Club for the first time ever.